Kia ora, everybody, and thanks for coming along. My name's Stuart Brown, so I'm the Director of Arts and Culture for the city, for Rotorua Council, but I was also the Director of the museum when it closed in December 2018. Also got, 2016. Also got some of our team here with us as well. So I've got Amy McGregor, who's our Director of Capital Programs for the Wellbeing Group. That's all the big projects Council's working on at the moment. And we also have Simone and Kathy here from our comms team as well. So I'll be presenting, and then Amy's here to answer all the questions I can't. So we'll get underway. Just capping on why this project has really taken as long as it has. So if you're looking at the two projects, particularly Sir Howard Morrison Centre, right, from go to woe, that's taken us 5 years from closure to detailed sizing assessment to completion, right? This particular building is way more complex than that building, and the reason why it's taken so long. We're dealing with a number of different build eras here. So 2018, the area, and sorry, start again. 1908 is the area in the middle. So that was the original build, and there were extensions put on in 2008 as part of the Centennial project, and then 2011 with the South Wing extension. And so that was to fulfill the original design of the building. So they ran out of money when they were building it in 1908. So what's happened? So the first thing we did in 2017 was the investigation work that we did to find out the detailed seismic rating for the building. So what is it we're trying to fix here? That's shown after about a year's work that we landed up with an MBS, or New Building Standard score, of just 19%. So for a building not to be earthquake prone or earthquake risk, you need to be 67% or above. So the museum is at 19. During that period, we 3D scanned the whole building, and that really posed a great piece of information for us, particularly over the COVID years, where we're able to continue to work in the design. In 2018, we completed the concept design, the business case, and we did a full decanter, taking out all the collections of the museum and storing them at the museum's offsite on the other side of town, and completed all the crack mapping. So all the cracks in the building were physically measured and mapped. At that point, Council agreed to invest $15.5 million in the long-term plan back then, and also that remained unchanged. In 2019, we completed detailed design and what we call ECI. So ECI stands for Early Contractor Involvement, and that's where you have the builder look at the design and check for its buildability. We completed all zones in the detailed design phase, because we were trying to do this project as quickly as we possible in stages. And then we also, the heritage approvals and resource consent do take a little bit of time. In April and September, we've secured, of that year, we secured our funding from the PGF funds through central government and other agencies, Ministry of Heritage and Culture as well, where we became fully funded of the $53.5 million that we were looking for, 71% of it being external. And then we started work with Hawkins in November in the South Wing, where there's some minimal work that had to happen in that wing, which were around connections that failed in Christchurch. So we were upgrading those in the South Wing only, even though it was built in 2011. After that, we got underway in 2020. The ECI, or the Hawkins construction, identified a number of buildability issues with the design that we had. So there was an awful lot of steel going in this building, and there were some real questions around whether or not it actually could be done, whether it could be done safely with the building, and the design cost were becoming increasingly more risky for us. And there were some really negative impacts on the heritage. So that's part of our funding agreement with Heritage New Zealand, is the preservation of much of the original heritage fabric as possible. That ECI caused us to pause the project. We did a review of the design and we felt that it wasn't buildable. So we stopped and we did a structural design reset. And we moved from what we call a force-based approach to the structural solution to a displacement philosophy. So force-based is basically you build a big structure, steel structure in our case, inside the current structure, and you bolt that building to it in order to give it its strength. The displacement approach is quite a different approach, where it actually, you take the existing strengths of the current museum, a current building, and then you look at the weak points and strengthen those only. It's quite a different philosophy. It's not used a lot here in New Zealand. Maybe only 5% structural engineers would look at it that way. In fact, we did have a real trouble finding a peer reviewer for that type of process here. We found Demetrio, who's Italian, who in Italy they do a lot of this work this way because they've got a lot of unreinforced masonry buildings in Italy, and Desir brought that to the table. During 2020, we had some geothermal issues that delayed the project, the build that was already underway in the south wing, where we had high temperatures and steam coming out underneath the new south wing of up to 100 degrees. So it took us a month to find the cause of that, which was a bore that had failed at around about 40 metres deep in the close proximity to the building. Our initial thoughts around that was this happened just in the first lockdown of COVID, and with all the other bores being closed down, with the Millennium Hotel and Polynesian Spa not operating, we thought it might have been a bit of a build-up in pressure. So it did take us a little while, and we did get GNS scientist Brad Scott involved in that as well. During then the next piece of work we did, we found a lot of asbestos in the ground under the museum, so that had to be removed. That took a lot longer than we anticipated for a couple of reasons. One is that underneath the museum, if you've been there, it's very, very hot, so workers can't work long periods without break and taking water on board. But also we couldn't use cooling fans in there because it was in the fine dust under there, and that would throw it up in the air, which would create problems for us. Despite all the gear they wear, it still took quite a lot longer than we anticipated. In 2021, we did additional testing of the building, so there is no book that says what the structural strengths are. Materials built in 1906, so the unreinforced pumice concrete walls. As an example, your fence post at home, when you buy a bag of concrete for that, it's 15 MPa. Your house is 25 plus, commercial buildings are 40 plus, and the museum is 3.8 to 9. So, like I said, there is no book that tells you, what native materials are milled in 1906, what their strength is in relation to earthquakes. Not like a modern build where you go and look up an RSJ beam and it'll tell the structural engineer what it's capable of. So we did more additional testing and then additional testing in the ground, and I'll talk about that a little bit further in the presentation. And then we had more geothermal issues where the 8 power cables that feed the museum were corroded by heat. And that provided us another challenge. We lost power to the building for a number of months. And then we had to look at the design of, rather than just putting power cables back in the ground, building trenches and venting those trenches to mitigate any further issues into the future. 2022, developed design is complete and cost estimates in. We're in the final stages of detailed design now, and consenting and procurement is planned for later this year. And the funding gap that was created by the delay, the impacts of COVID price escalation, is between 18 and 20 million at the moment, and we're searching for funds for that. Okay. All right. What happened there? Right. So we're just going to go through the two real components here. So the structural, so this was what we showed here back in 2019. So this was a steel solution for the building. As you can see, there's lots of it. It's extremely complex and quite difficult to get into to actually build this. The tool, some of the initial thoughts were in the main atrium, dropping down one long steel strong back and bolting that in, but we've actually, the walls aren't straight in the museum, they curve and bend. So it became problematic in terms of trying to retain the heritage fabric of it all. It was high cost, and questions were really raised about whether it was buildable or not. The reset, the structural design solution here, this is quite different. So a lot more simpler. We're still achieving 80% of new building standard, which was our goal. It's buildable, it's less evasive, it's faster, and it's more cost effective. And so we've moved from all this steel into using the inherent strength. So the whole museum is put into this huge model where they put the stresses on it of various different types of earthquake. It pinpoints the weak areas, and so this targets those weak areas. So new technologies become available here. So we're using carbon fibre strips and structural plaster on the walls here to strengthen the walls rather than steel, and CLT panels clamping the walls together. And then for the diaphragm for the roof is just ply, double ply. So quite a lot simpler. I make it sound really simple, but it's not. You've actually got to do a lot of work to actually understand what the building's going to do once you put this stuff on it. Understanding the ground. So we've done quite a few samples around the building. This is what the ground looks like under the museum. So you can see that even the core sample that come out, it falls to bits pretty quickly. And it's hot in places up to 60 degrees. When we first started this project in our testing in 2017, this is the methodology they use for testing the ground strength and liquefaction. So they push this pedometer down into the ground and it measures its resistance. Now the problem here in Rotorua is that once the temperatures get around that 60 degrees, this can't provide accurate information. So the geotech engineers become quite conservative at that point and always base it on the worst case scenario. So this came out at 40% NBS. So new building standard, basically what that means that 40% is when the ground will fail. To address that is to put grout injection columns under the museum. So this requires us drilling down 6 metres. These columns are about 1.5 to 2 kilometres in diameter, and then you grout inject concrete into the ground. For the museum, this is a real challenge because this isn't a flat piece of ground you can access. This actually required us to prop the floor, drill through the floor in the museum, connect the shafts to the organ, do that underneath. At that stage, we were looking at anywhere between 200 and 300 of those under the museum, and an estimated cost at that point of an additional 20 million. This just gives you an example of the structures of the pumice soils that we sit on here. As you can see, it's like honeycomb, and these are minute particles here. It just gives you an idea of what those things look like. Of course, they're crushable, and not a lot is known about these soils in terms of liquefaction, because liquefaction was a word we only learned about after Christchurch. Then through Tompkins and Taylor, and this technology is not that old either, is that we use this triaxial testing. So this is a piece of equipment that's come from Japan, and we take the core samples and they put them in this cylinder here, and basically they vibrate them until they fail. Now what this shown under this testing is that ground under the museum is 70% MBS, not the original old testing methodology of 40%. Which means that all those grouting columns that we thought we were going to have to build, dig, we're not doing anymore. So that's sort of the complexities of it all. Where we're to next is that we will complete detailed design in November this year. That's right down to the detailed drawings, and they'll be lodged for building consent. The exhibition development work is underway, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in the morning. Later. In discussions with funders for more support, so we've already gone back through central government agencies and have some funding applications in there for additional support to fund the gap. The decision will be brought back to council in terms of what they want to do with the project. It's an update in terms of where we're at with the consents. We'll have a better estimate of the costs with the QS once detailed design is complete for a decision by the new council. And construction, once approved, would be underway in early next year, with the museum opening in 2025. There's also more information about the project on the council's website page, on the Vision to Action page. There's lots of videos there of consultants as well, so you can hear it from them directly, not just from me. And you can also visit the museum website page to have your say on the museum exhibition, what that might look like. Just want to run through, because these were some of the original design features that we haven't lost in the design reset. So one of the big things is about accessibility in our buildings. So this, for the first time ever actually, will provide accessibility to people to the mud bath basement. So there's a whole new lift, and those that remember the museum with its old little lift, you sort of press the button and had a 50% chance of getting to the top. So this is a new, all new lift that will take you from the mud bath basement right up onto the mezzanine floor as well. This will just gives you an example of what the mud bath basement, it may look a little bit modern here in the structure, but it'll be exactly how it was. And accessibility will give you access to the mud bath basement, and those that have been to the museum been underneath before, the whole walkway there, where that wasn't possible before. The cafe, so that's what it used to look like, and when I look at that now I go, oh God, it really looks really tired. This is part of what it's going to look like in the future. There's a new mezzanine floor to go in the cafe to give us increased capacity, but also provides for additional fire egress for our compliance that we need to allow people back onto the roof space. It won't. The tiles and walls and that will look like the original. It's not going to look that modern, but it'll certainly look how it would with some paint and tidy up. We've also got a new conference space. So this is the mezzanine floor up on the left-hand side as it was today. Those small little offices, for those that have been up there, they were never part of the original build in 1908. They were put in and made to look like the original building. They will come back out to provide a new conference space, so the museum can do public talks. They can hold various different meetings or small functions in there as well. The reason we're taking them back out is it wasn't part of the original heritage part of the building, and when you're building new structures or within heritage structures, the idea is that the heritage principle, if it's not heritage, don't try and copy it. So if you look at the Howard Morrison Performing Arts Centre, you can clearly see what the modern new structure is and what the heritage structure is. So we're going back to doing that here. The hallway that runs down to the cafe, so once again on the left-hand side, that's what it originally looked like in 1908. And as you can see in 2019, a lot had changed in there in terms of the way it was used. It was the entrance to the ablution blocks, but also the shaking theatre. That's going to be reinstalled back to the original here, so this is what it will look like. The cafe will be glazed on this side, and we're really doing that to manage air quality control within the museum, which is a big part of the project as well. We're extending the amount of scrubbed air within the museum so we can hold more exhibition spaces. And once again, the Rachel pool, which was underneath the cafe, was re-exposed when we did our investigation work. You can see the walls all being stripped back here. That's for the structural engineers to have a look at the structure and see how it's put together and for testing samples. It's a real shame about the Rachel pool because at some point when they did some strengthening work in this area, they sprayed shotcrete on the inside of this. So it's a bit of a shame we can't show its original because it would have been tiled. And we will be showing some of that in the new cafe in terms of a glazed floor over the top, some subtle lighting just to show you its original purpose of that building. And once again, you'll notice here that the modernisation here is new structure that separates it from the original heritage. Exhibition development. The northern galleries will still remain the short-term exhibition spaces. For those frequent flyers to the museum, we had a short-term exhibition program where we'd change our exhibitions over every 3 months, and that would bring us in new, fresh things for the community to look at. The southern galleries are pretty much as they were, apart from the addition of the new lift lobby for the mud bath basement. We're a mixture of the previous and new, as informed by our community engagement. A new exhibition designed to modern standards, including interactivity, bit of technology, and for those who have visited Te Papa recently, there's some pretty cool stuff to get people engaged in the various exhibitions. We're also moving to co-curation with iwi and community. So historically, curators would take an object or take a theme and they'd write their own thoughts and interpretation of those collection items. With co-curation, we want to be talking with the community when we're doing that because they're their stories or iwi stories, and it's being able to tell those stories with an iwi lens or with a community lens. And I think that's really important. It's a step forward for museum rather than a single interpretation that's not always, and is one interpretation, not necessarily the views of all. The exhibition build and design is underway now and will be installed until 2025. We've secured $4.2 million for that piece of work from the Regional Bay of Plenty Council, and there will be more required. We're looking at a budget of about $9 million for the exhibitions to go back in. Oh, that seemed a bit quick. All right. So that's a bit of an update. That shows you the complexities, the ground, the structure, the change of design philosophy from force-based to displacement-based. We believe that taking that pause was the right thing to do because we now have a solution that we know that can be built, and we know that we can build that in a couple of years if we get away early next year with a decision from Council. So, happy to take some questions.